I want to welcome you. My name is John Tare. I'm president of the Boulder Chamber of Commerce. I am welcoming you to the Regional Housing and Transportation Forum, which we are so glad to have all of you here. I'm looking around this audience, and it's such a diversity of perspectives from business leaders, civic leaders, and we need all of your voice in this conversation. So as I walk through and introduce a number of folks today who are important to driving this conversation, I just want to know that all of you who are drinking the beers and eating the food now, this is all about you. We want your opinion, we need your perspective to address these challenging issues that we have and face in our county around regional housing and transportation issues, as well as economic sustainability. And when you bring a group like this together with a distinguished group of panelists, you know that it only starts and comes together through a wonderful collaboration. So I'm just going to take a second and recognize some of the folks who were key to making this event come together tonight. So first of all, I want to thank our sponsors. And I will walk through this, give deliberate introductions because they are so critical to making this a success. And the first is a new sponsor with the Boulder Chamber. It's the gold sponsor for this roundtable forum, and it's Boulder Transportation Connections. And I would love to have Megan Talbert stand up, and also board member Chris Haglin with the City of Boulder. Megan, who's the executive director, and also David Cook, a board member. And I just want to feature for all of you why they are a sponsor of this roundtable, and that is because Boulder Transportation Connections is about helping businesses figure out how best to support their the transportation needs of their employees, of their customers. And it includes all sorts of great alternative transportation options, which maybe are unfamiliar to some of our business leaders throughout the community. So we want to be very clear, and we're going to be talking about this throughout the year, that we have this partnership with Boulder Transportation Connections to have them serve as our consultant and as a resource for businesses in this community around their transportation options for their employees, in particular alternative transportation options. So really excited about this relationship and this partnership. So we also have two great silver sponsorships. Terrapin Care Station, which is providing great medical and recreational marijuana. It's humorous, but they're great business leaders in our community, really innovative partners. And then also a wonderful new sponsor partner for us, BVA Compass Bank. And in the back we have Dana Bondi. I want Dana Bondi just to stand up there, be recognized, one of our great leaders in our community, also a fellow former Bostonian. So welcome, Dana. Thank you. And thank you for support. And then as you enjoy those beverages, recognize who brought them to us. It's Hazel's Beverage World. They are wonderful supporters of the Boulder Chamber, and Bruce Sturking, who I think is supposed to be here tonight, want to thank him and his company for their support and keeping the conversation lively this evening. And then in terms of the concept for this and the driving force to bring us together, I have to thank our county commissioners. And I know we have Cindy Domenico and Deb Gardner out in the audience. If you can just stand up there and just be recognized. And just a round of applause for our wonderful commissioners. These are folks who are partners with us in addressing this issue of regional housing and transportation and economic forces, and want to thank them. This is the first beginning of a journey with them to have a conversation about how do we address these issues, but bringing the business perspective to the table, which is not always available in some of the more conventional forums. So thank you very much for creating this forum for us and supporting us in this. So this is a collaboration tonight of three entities that take a focused look at planning in our community, some of them nationally, to address issues around human density, human population. How do we work, live, and play in a wonderful quality of life? And that's where the Boulder Chamber lives. The Boulder Chamber is about being the voice for business community interests in Boulder. But we do it in a way that's not your conventional business-oriented advocacy group. We do it in the Boulder way. And that means that we have a balanced perspective. We care as much as all the citizens in our community about environmental preservation, the environmental qualities of our community, making sure that we are addressing social impact issues. But clearly we have to also be the voice, somebody does, for economic issues and making sure that we have a strong and vital economy to support all the values of this community. So that's why this conversation for the Boulder Chamber is so vital. And we are glad to be a partner in driving this forward and bringing this forum together. But we have two other great partners that we are joined with today. One is the Urban Land Institute. And Gavin McMillan is here, who's going to be representing them. And just, if you maybe, Gavin, come up, just speak briefly about Urban Land Institute.
Thanks, John, and I will be brief because I'm losing my voice.
We all are.
I know, like many of you, but my name is Gavin McMillan. I'm the co-chair of the local chapter of the Urban Land Institute. ULI, or the Urban Land Institute, is an international nonprofit that's comprised of land use planners, development professionals, people working in housing and transportation. And what we work to do is facilitate an open exchange of ideas around land use planning, information and experiences to help create better places. And that's generally what we do, and locally we do that through our Salon series, which we hold quarterly events focused on hot topics locally, land use and planning. And I do want to plug right now that we're going to have one April 14th. We're going to have the state demographer come in and talk about where Boulder has been, where we're going, and where we might be eventually, and how perhaps our housing changes might need to change to reflect that. So that's coming up in April at 5 p.m. on the 14th. I don't have a location yet, but stay tuned and we'll keep you posted. Thanks so much for being here, and thanks for having us. Thanks, John.
Yeah. I might ask Gavin to leave that T here because I'm losing my voice too. It's a common theme. So another wonderful collaborator, but a new voice in our community, is an organization, Better Boulder. Better Boulder is represented tonight by the two co-chairs, which I think reflect the balance of perspectives on the Better Boulder organization. Will Torr, former mayor of Boulder, former county commissioner, and Ken Hotard, who's with the Boulder Area Realtors Association. So if you two can just come up and introduce Better Boulder.
Thanks, John. And I think Ken and I really do represent the kind of balance that we're seeking on Better Boulder. We started this organization a little over a year ago because of the sense that Boulder had done great work over the years at protecting our open space, creating a community that had some boundaries to it, but that there was a lot more that could be done to create a more sustainable community within those boundaries. That if we're serious about our goals around housing affordability and around climate change and about being a place that's really open to economic innovation, that we needed to be willing to share our community with more people. That we needed to look at how can we grow within our boundaries in a way that will bring more jobs, will bring more opportunities for people to live here, will make us an economically vital community, and will allow us to do this in ways where we can all drive less in our everyday lives. And that seemed like an opportunity for the environmental community and business community to come together.
Absolutely. Thank you, Will. I have to say, appreciate Will reaching out to the business community and to the social welfare community to bring us together around these issues. Really looking toward creating housing choices on how to get around our community, transportation choices, to meet the varying lifestyles that folks are trying to achieve here. As John said, this is not a single focus effort. It's really to create tremendous diversity and choice within our community. We're trying to meet economic, social, and environmental goals simultaneously. It's a wonderful collaboration, and thanks again, Will.
Thanks.
So three great organizations collaborating, and also the partnership with Boulder County. So just excited to come together for this event. So how will this event roll? We are blessed to have two distinguished panelists with us tonight, and we're going to give them an opportunity to address the audience from their perspective as folks who analyze, assess, and have the perspective of the national attention to these types of issues, the balance of housing, transportation issues, and economic needs. We're going to give them, they'll have about 20 minutes each to address the audience. We will then have, and I've been said strictly, so Angelique, who, bless her, put this forum together, thank you, Angelique, 15 minutes of Q&A, and we're going to be clear that this is questions and answers because we want to make sure that we get extra information, unanswered questions addressed. And then the real meat of the evening will begin. And what is that? That is the dialogue that we are going to be having around the tables that you're sitting right now, where we ask you to reflect on what you heard and then consider what are the solutions to these challenges that we face in our community that we can bring to the dialogue that I know is happening not just at the county level, but each of the cities that are represented by various development and economic interests in this room. So we will spend plenty of time, give all of you a chance to weigh in on that. We have facilitators who will be helping you with that conversation. And then we will have some closing remarks from our panelists who will be walking around from your tables, trying to collect the salient key tidbits to reflect that back. But just know that we'll be recording everything that is brought forward tonight so that we can bring that forward as a comprehensive package of solutions. So let's get rolling. And we're going to start with Karen Chapple, who is a professor with the City and Regional, or professor of City and Regional Planning with the University of California at Berkeley. She currently serves as the interim director of the Institute of Urban and Regional Development, where she specializes in housing and community and economic development, as well as regional planning. She's the faculty director of the University of California Berkeley Center of Community Innovation, where she has led research on affordable housing and economic development near transit and the role of the green economy and industrial land in the California economy. Her recent book is titled Planning Sustainable Cities and Regions Towards More Equitable Development. And just a little bit of background on the personal side. Prior to academics, she was a practice planning and economic development and land use and transportation in New York and San Francisco. She's crossed the coast. So welcome, Karen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the invitation to come back to Boulder. I love coming to Boulder. It's where it's not only incredibly beautiful and some of my best friends live here, but there's a wonderfully sophisticated dialogue about urban development in this city, and I love jumping back into it. I come from a place where there's another such dialogue. It's Berkeley. I call it the Boulder of the West. But the last time I was here was 7 years ago, actually, almost to the day, and I spoke with Plan Boulder, and it was very interesting thinking back over the conversations that were happening 7 years ago, and thinking about some of the same policy questions that are coming up today, but with a little bit more sophistication. But it raises questions about implementation and politics and why things don't move faster in this town, which you guys can maybe explain to me later over a beer. Okay, so I want to provide some of the big picture context. This is what I get to do as as the professor, and then Scott's going to clean up all the different loose angles. So we need to sort of think about where we're coming from in the field of planning and where we're going to. And I like to think of it as the conversation of the 20th century, which was about suburbs, and it was about the inefficient development pattern that we had in the form of suburban sprawl that consumed a lot of open space, that led to a lot of vehicle miles traveled, that was perhaps inequitable for the lower income folks that were not able to live there. This is something we worked on a lot in the last century. We're still having to work on it, and I just drove around Boulder County, and boy, I saw a lot of this. So this is still a major issue, but there's a new issue on the horizon, and it's what I call the 21st century challenge, which is the cost of livability, and in an era of growing inequality. Because what's happening is we have a new value that's cutting across different age groups across the country, a value for more livable urban development, and people are actually moving back to the city, people of all ages. And when there's a lot of pressure on the core of our urban regions, those prices go up. And actually, this diagram I'm showing is von Thunen, an agricultural economist of the middle of the 19th century, who pointed out this pattern of when in the core you tended to have more expensive development and cost decline as you have distance from the central business district. Or actually, he was talking about agriculture, but it still holds true. And recently I was in Copenhagen, and I took this picture while drinking a beer for $10. Wow. And so I meditated. I'm going to enjoy this scene of livability, the most expensive beer I've ever had. And this is, maybe Boulder's a little ways away from becoming this, but this is the type of livable urban form that you are seeing people really drawn to, and especially the younger generations, and cities all over the planet are aspiring to be like this, maybe without the $10 beer. Mm-hmm. So this is happening in a context of growing income inequality, and this is the share of all income held by the top 1%. I pulled Colorado data here from the EPI website. Colorado always kind of nicely tracks the U.S. trend, but you can see this share of income held by the top 1% was very high in the 1920s, and is again ascending to those levels, even in Colorado, very rapidly. And people are looking at this, and just in the last few years, from 2010, you've seen this escalation, the reconcentration of wealth in the hands of the wealthiest. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how we understand inequality. And economists are puzzling about this, and you can see this on the pages of the New York Times, because this is a very public debate, because we're seeing these increasing concentrations of wealth at the same time as we're seeing decreases in real wages, and this is not supposed to happen according to conventional economic theory, where if you had overall growth, economic growth, there were supposed to be dividends, what they called the productivity dividend in the 1950s, that everybody would experience growing wages. This isn't happening. So Piketty comes out with a book on the role of capital and inherited wealth, and describing this growing inequality that we have. And Joseph Stiglitz is actually coming back at Piketty with some other ideas. And I wanted to invoke Stiglitz because this guy is a would-be urban economist. So what Stiglitz is walking around saying these days is that Piketty was only talking about capital and that really just the factors of production, but we also need to think about ownership, and wealth comes from owning things and controlling the rents on things. He argues that if you really want to unpack why you have the increase of inequality, it's because of capital gains in land. And this has policy implications, and so where Piketty would just say tax capital, tax the wealthy, Stiglitz says tax capital gains on land. And also he says we need to really think about inequality, which is permeated through all of our different public policies. But he's bringing land into the debate, and I really appreciate that as an urban planner, because I see that is where we're going to go in this century, is thinking more strategically about how we do value capture, about how we do more location efficiency, which is something that my colleague Scott is the pioneer of, and he'll talk about more. But so the idea of value capture is that we're making public investments, and here is a transit line in the Bay Area, and we make a lot of public investments, and private property owners around those public investments reap the benefits and walk away with the windfall profits. And we could do more to recapture some of that for the public good, and quite possibly to recapture it for affordable housing. Okay, so that's the big picture. Now let's go talk about Boulder a little bit. So here we are in Boulder, and so this is the ACS data for 2000 versus 2013. 2000's in blue, 2013's in orange, and so you can see how inequality has increased in dramatically in the last 13 years. I bet the 2014 data is going to be even better. So look what's going on here, and this is in real dollars, so comparing 2000 2013. So you have this huge growth in those of income less than 15,000, and then where else do you have growth? Oh, it's if you make 150,000 or more, and there happens to be something like 1,500 new households that are in this group, that are in Boulder City. This is city data. So you have this kind of 1% phenomenon manifesting itself in your own little Boulder. And so I went to the housing market data. I think Scott's going to cover some of this more thoroughly than I am here. The real estate sales have only really perked up quite recently. It's the rental data that really tells the story, which is really, really interesting, nearly the double of residential rents in the city, which indicates quite a crisis. And if you look at job projections, and I just took the projections for the county and looked at where they were distributed across occupations of different skill levels. So you have almost half of your jobs in the near future are going to be low wage, low skill jobs, and about a quarter high wage. So it is a bifurcated structure, but it's actually predominantly low wage, which means affordability issues are only going to become worse. And I think we really need to be aware of this context of ongoing, constant growing inequality as we think about our urban planning paradigms. Because in many ways, we are still in a 1950s growth paradigm across the country, and we haven't really rethought our planning and housing models to deal with this new inequality that is becoming the reality in this country. So, thinking about those jobs, where are they going to be? So this is, this story you guys all know. I've seen it in all your documents. This is the LEH data about commuting, and showing the 62,000 in commuters each day, 16,000 out commuters, and about 18,000 working locally. And so this just gives you a sense of how what's happening in Boulder City per se is shaping what's happening in the region, because the region it's a regional labor market, and the region is serving as the bedroom for the jobs in Boulder, and so you have this huge and growing jobs housing imbalance in Boulder, and it might be appropriate here to bring up the new Google campus, which is a challenging issue on the horizon, and yet an opportunity if you can get some community benefits out of it. Hopefully you're negotiating those right now. But so this is what we live through in the Bay Area, is this tech job phenomenon, Google gentrification, as the New York Times article had it. And there is some truth to that, and we looked at that issue here. I'll jump over here to a study we did 10 years ago of the dot-com boom in the Bay Area. On the left is a slide showing where the highest property price increases were in orange, was where the housing market was appreciating. And then we mapped that against where the high-tech firms were, also in orange. That's the map on the right. And when we ran the regression model, we found out that those tech jobs were actually causing the housing bubble at that period. And so there's this fear, again, that this is what we're going to start to look like in the Bay Area and in Boulder, this with a lot of housing for the 1%. And the hard thing is, even though actually the numbers of new tech workers are not that high, the builders, the developers are really well prepared to build this kind of housing. They're much better prepared and they have much more capacity, and they make much more money building this kind of housing than middle income housing. So that creates a real challenge for how you grow, because the developers can just jump on this stuff and slap these babies up. Okay, so the thing to think about in terms of jobs and housing is sort of the big picture. So job growth and loss happens very, very rapidly, and it happens according to the business cycle. Housing is very slow. It takes a long time to build new housing units. So these cycles are always out of whack. This is the Bay Area, data for the Bay Area from, where does it start? I can't even read my own slide, 1991 to 2006. And so you can see the job boom cycle, and then housing production just sort of churns along. It doesn't necessarily respond. So it's important to keep this big picture, because though we feel really, really out of whack when the jobs are growing really rapidly, like they are right now in the Bay Area and here as well, it's important to keep perspective that we're going to lose those jobs when the downturn happens. And people are thinking we're about 2 years from the end of this growth period. This growth period started in 2008. Growth periods don't usually last more than 6, 8, 10 years, so it's going to come to an end, and so we don't want to kind of overreact. We want to keep that in mind, that slowly but surely we build the housing. Okay, so moving on. So I want to talk a little bit about regional approaches and best practices there, and then a little bit about some local approaches here in Boulder City. So in terms of regional initiatives, there are quite a few really outstanding business groups that have stepped forward to address urban policy issues. And here I would put the Silicon Valley Leadership Group up there among the very best at engaging its business community in urban policy issues. And I pulled up this survey, that's the slide on the right. This is a survey of CEOs in Silicon Valley about what they think is important. And so 52% don't like the traffic, well, sure, and 49% are concerned about education. 48% were concerned about affordable housing. That's really astounding for a business community, and that really shows the leadership of this group in educating the business sector in Silicon Valley about urban development issues, about urban sprawl, about jobs housing imbalance, and so they have become very, very engaged. Now, and they often do some propaganda. Part of it is about educating the community. I think this slide might have actually come from Scott. Scott had an organization called the Center for Transit-Oriented Development, which produced a lot of really great propaganda about the benefits of TOD. And so the leadership group has borrowed his propaganda quite liberally and uses it on an ongoing basis to educate the population about how they want to, about different ways to grow. And it's really a benefit to the community to have that kind of educational function of a business group. So I would urge you all to be thinking about that kind of role. Interestingly, there are regional initiatives in the Denver region as well. Does anybody know what this is from? The Metropolitan Revolution, Denver. So Bruce Katz of the Brookings Institution wrote a book called The Metropolitan Revolution, and the best chapter in this book, I give it to my students, is about Denver and what a regional energy there is in Denver to solve problems. And this may or may not be true. I'm sure you guys could criticize this. But so he tells the story of the sales tax, the transit sales tax, and cooperation, and the Metro Mayor's Caucus and the Denver Metro Chamber. And it's heartwarming, and it brings me to tears. But but so I think you see these types of things coming together. I mean, the sales tax was really a minor miracle in the planning world. So thinking about how to develop these types of collaborations, whether this was the ideal one or not, you do have the infrastructure here already in the region. Okay, another way to think about regionalism is from the bottom up. So in the Bay Area, we have something called the Great Communities Collaborative. And this is an initiative run by three regional nonprofits, Transform, Nonprofit Housing Association, and Urban Habitat. And what they do is they're thinking about the 75 new transit stations that are planned for the future in this region. And they are working very actively to build capacity for affordable housing around the transit stations. They came up with a land acquisition fund. They also have come up with some ideas for a regional housing trust fund, and you already have this model replicated here in Colorado with Mile High Connect. So another great resource for you. I'm told I need to wrap up. So I'm going to go very quickly over some local approaches. So I read Housing Boulder's toolkit and was just blown away. This is a fantastic document. I just joined the Berkeley Planning Commission, and I'm going to make everybody read this. There's so much material in here, and I'd just like to note that there is some thinking about value capture in terms of land banking, land trust, linkage fees, incentive zoning, other types of tools that we have to capture value. There's not enough, and Scott is going to explain why we need to think a lot more about transportation and linking also transportation into these policies. And then there's the debate about production and preservation, and I was really struck looking at the documents about how much you produce in this city versus how much you lose. So you're basically producing, if I'm correct from what I read, about 100 units per year through the inclusionary housing ordinance, 100 affordable units, and then at the same time, a lot of the market affordable, what we call naturally occurring affordable units, are actually being lost because that downward filtering to lower income populations is not happening. It's gentrifying, it's filtering up instead. So this is a really, really big issue. I would urge you to think more about that. It may not be beautiful, but it's really, really important housing stock for you guys. Okay, and I'm just going to go, I'm not going to talk so much about my favorite topic, ADUs. You can read about this on my website because I have a lot of stuff on this. I would just say that you need to work really, really hard. And I know the ADU conversation, the conversation about backyard cottages and secondary units has been going on in this region for a long, long time. And it's been going on in California too. And the issue is you got to kind of free up the market. And to do that, you have to make it really, really easy for homeowners to build these things. And there are several things staying in the way. We have lot size regulations, which are much too onerous and not progressive. We have regulations that are on setbacks and parking. And in our study, we looked at that. We looked at these barriers, and we looked at what would happen if we got rid of them. And in each case, each city we looked at, you could double or triple or quadruple production if you got rid of the zoning barriers. You also need to put in transit strategies like car share, and you need to be proactive about it. And you need to be thinking about Uber and Lyft as well as car share. What we found was that you have a market for it in your second unit residents. They often don't have a car. They're much less likely to own a car than the residents of the main dwelling. So this is an opportunity then to have a transit-oriented strategy. And Santa Cruz took this to heart. It's done a better job than anywhere else. It put together a booklet which explained to homeowners how to build one in their backyard. It tripled production just through doing, making it more transparent to homeowners. So this is something that Boulder could be doing. This is my book, and I'll turn it over to Scott.
Karen, that was great. So while I appreciate the sentiment about the Denver region and our tax, I'm not sure the tiers that you were talking about were the same tiers that we've experienced, but we'll have to talk to you about our train. But I will say that it's just wonderful to hear that there are so many great things already happening in our region, and so listen, there's a lot to be proud of, and so we're building on a great base, and particularly I'm sure some of our city planners back there appreciated hearing some of the comments about the housing, David Driscoll. But I will say that for us, it is going to be a continuing challenge, and working collaboratively as a region. I think that's the message that I get out of your presentation. And another person who has been, I guess Karen said, he's going to be batting cleanup here, and a pioneer. Scott Bernstein will add additional fuel to the conversation. He is the president of the Center for Neighborhood Technology, which promotes sustainable communities by helping local leaders to better use their hidden assets. President Clinton appointed him to the President's Council for Sustainable Development, where he co-chaired its task forces on metropolitan sustainable communities and cross-cutting climate change strategies. Scott is the co-author of The New Transit Town, which is credited for co-founding the modern transportation movement, and redefined or defined transit-oriented development. So we do have a pioneer in our midst. And he also wrote a book, Street Smart: Streets and Cities in the 21st Century. He serves on the board of the American Council for Energy Efficiency, Economy, and the Congress for New Urbanism. Scott is listed, and I've not heard of this listing, but it sounds pretty exciting.
Heard of it either, so
Planet Ism's 100 Top Urban Thinkers, okay? I'm nowhere on that list, I'm pretty sure. Again, another credit to him. And he's one of the leading thinkers in urban planning and technology. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. I'm told it's supposed to be planetizen, but it's not any easier to remember. Well, thank you very much to all the co-sponsors for inviting me. I haven't been in Boulder since 1979. I spent a few days here participating in debates about how can we possibly grow our way out of growth. Good to know that there's progress after all this time. I was asked to compliment Karen's excellent exposition on the tensions between wealth, income, and the cost of living, with a perspective on transportation, and appropriately because you've had the disappointment of not getting the rail line, the joy of getting the bus rapid transit, but nobody can give a straight answer as to what it's going to do for you. The debate over Google and whether it's a good or a bad thing, and whether there is any room to capture any extra community benefits out of it. And in a context, frankly, where nobody's got a crystal ball on the economy. And but I think some of the work that we've been doing over the last few years to provide an honest scorecard on how to judge whether transportation investments are net positive or not, hopefully can get adopted here. And I'm going to walk through a series of issues having to do with how to keep score on the economy while you're keeping score on your transportation investments, put it in a Boulder context, explore some new options for financing a successful future, and hopefully give you some guidance on how this might result in a more inclusive and livable Boulder city and Boulder metropolitan region. Now this one's labeled "When Coffee Came to London." It's a woodcut from around 1700. It has nothing to do with Starbucks, I assure you. This was the story is that coffee was a relatively new hot commodity in London. It caught on quite quickly, and it caught on quickly in part because people figured out how to invent a new kind of retail establishment where to sell this stuff at, the non-alcoholic public house that sold coffee, a coffee house, of which you have many now. And this guy was really smart. He figured out how to do market studies. London was a walking city. The word transportation wasn't in the vernacular, right? So people got around by walking in and out of the city, across the bridge, from place A to place B. And he mapped out these patterns. I actually have a copy of one of his maps to see where people were hanging out. And they were hanging outside in really lousy weather. So he figured he could invite them into a coffee house, and that would be his marketing strategy. So he was very successful, and he had a lot of these. And one day he found his biggest market ever in the London Docklands, and he saw this group of people talking, and he eavesdropped. And who were they? They were ship owners. And what were they doing? They were taking bets on whether their ships would come in or not on time or not, and with what they ordered or not. So he figured a market. So he builds them a great big coffee house, and he runs out of room. So he doesn't give up. He relocates that coffee house to what today is the financial district in the city of London, and he puts slate on the walls, and he gives people chalk to record their wagers, and paper on the table, and all sorts of little convenience things like this got added every single year. And 70 years later, Edward Lloyd's descendants sold shares in the enterprise. That was the start of Lloyd's of London in the insurance industry. And I want to submit that what we're doing tonight and what you do in your effort to try and chart a better future is to help people make a better bet and provide rooms like this where people can get together. And knowledge is non-rival. I mean, I'm from Chicago. What do I know from Boulder? You know, you could write a book about it. So you can, if it makes you feel better, you can think of Chicago as your far eastern suburb tonight, because I'll probably get something wrong. But I think by putting it in this context, we can start to understand the challenges that you're going to be facing the next couple of years, some of which Karen alluded to. Now, this R word that's re-entered the English language the last couple of years, resilience, is there because both the economy and the weather have gotten more chaotic, more or less at the same time, not always in sequence with each other, much like Karen's point about housing and jobs being out of sync. And resilience isn't just a new word for sustainability. It refers to the ability of people to collectively adapt together. It's about community competence. It's about doing some things better together than others, but doing them in real time. It's about collective efficacy and empowerment. And I hope it doesn't undercut this definition I flashed up here if I tell you this came from the Committee on Resilience of the American Psychological Association, because I think in this case they've got their heads screwed on straight. Are we ready for the kinds of changes that we're facing? It's not just the individual decisions we need to make, but whether we're ready to make more of them, knowing that things are going to change. So let's look at some of those changes. Boulder's economy was not immune to the economic crash. The blue line is the United States economy. The green line is metropolitan Denver. The red line is Metro Boulder, Colorado. This measures GDP per capita from 2001 to 2013. And the economy crashed for a couple of years and recovered in a relatively short period of time in both Denver and in Boulder. But neither were the residents of Boulder. So if you just follow this line, which starts, these are quarterly reports starting in the third quarter in 1978. This is the housing price index, both for Boulder and for Denver. You see somewhere around 2007 this dip. And this dip lasted till, maybe a couple years ago, and then it started climbing again. And because the height of that is higher than it was before it started crashing, it's become fashionable to say, well, you've completely recovered and you've surpassed it. But if you read it very carefully and understand what goes into that, you lost somewhere between 7 and 8 years of wealth creation, both in Denver and in Boulder. And it's a very big number. I didn't have time to do the calculation, but you're far from total recovery, and you can't afford this. You certainly can't afford this because, in the sense that income has at least not been growing as fast as the cost of living, and in some cases, income is dropping while the cost of living is going up. So if something like this is going on, you might ask the question, is there something we could do that would be somewhat of an insurance policy, knowing that these changes are actually going to happen? I'm going to come back to that at the end, because I think that's the context within which you have to think about your growth future and the transportation choices that you're facing. This particular graph, I'm sorry about all the mind-numbing statistics. I do it kind of thoughtlessly. I'll show a few pictures later. But this is the price of gas in Boulder and Denver, and it spiked exactly when home values crashed, not only in this metro area, but just about every other area in the country. And because more people than not had switched to variable rate mortgages, it was unfortunate that the reset period for those also crashed. So people around here all of a sudden saw between $300 and $400 per month more in the cost of living because of the price of gas, and somewhere between $600 and $800 more because of the reset on the mortgage payment that they had to make because of variable rate mortgages. It only went up a quarter as much of that in the most location efficient parts of the region, the places where you were less dependent on driving and where you were more likely to have compact or multifamily housing and walkable environments to go with it. So in a sense, how you were laid out within the region represented somewhat of an informal and unintentional insurance policy. So gas prices, as the previous slide showed, have dipped. But in the last 2 years, gas prices are down, but the cost of driving is actually up. And even gas prices don't stay down forever. So if you look at it annually, there's the big dip after the spike. It went down and then it came up again. And I would say we'll end up by the time that the next 2 years show to what looked like $2 gas right now be more like $3 gas. And there's no guarantee it won't go up again. And of course, you don't want to have to bet your life on it not going like that. So again, the insurance policy question comes in. Can you really just be more efficient or more conscious and be less exposed to these kinds of forces, or can you do something so that you're permanently less exposed to them when they happen? This is from Chicago, but we have charts like this all over the country. The graph on the top shows the 26-week moving averages of gas prices, and the chart on the bottom shows foreclosure filings. You don't need to be a statistician to see that the shapes of these curves are almost identical. And what happened is that the price spike pushed people over the edge, particularly in suburban areas. And 6 to 9 months later, along with other factors, a wave of foreclosures followed. So let's see, will it move? Uh-oh. Now, don't take this out of my 20 minutes.
Okay.
It's your computer.
That's true. It is our computer.
Oh, I should use this thing, shouldn't I?
Maybe.
Okay.
Vamp, vamp.
It's those statistics.
It's those statistics. It was just too much for it.
As they say, power corrupts, PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. Wow.
Uh-oh. You're going to have to tell the joke.
How many minutes do I have left?
Oh, well, we'll reset you it.
Okay. Well, I could try doing this without the presentation, I suppose.
Well, see what you can do, and I'll see what I can do.
Oh, boy.
But you can't walk away from the mic, remember?
Oh, that's right. Okay, sorry about that. Lots of rules here. Okay.
I'm going to get on the other side.
Okay. All right, well, she's doing that. So how does all this fit into a discussion about the transportation choices that you're facing in Boulder and the development choices, and what how those two things might fit together. And we started an inquiry some years ago. There we go. Okay. Wow. Maybe you should give this presentation. This is a map of your area. It encompasses both Metro Boulder and Metro Denver. And the map on the left looks at monthly transportation expenses as a percentage of income. And where it's ever sort of yellowish or orange, they're low. And the map on the right looks at the same areas in 2009. And there's fewer yellow areas, but basically the core of Boulder and the core of Denver were the least exposed places to the price spikes that happen. And we don't have time to go through the mapping sequence on foreclosures and other problems that happen, but basically the location efficiency, the convenience and accessibility of these places represented a collective insurance policy. Much like, you know, when I was here 30 years ago, you would have had 5 watts per square foot of fluorescent lighting in this room, and I was doing an energy audit earlier because I'm compulsive that way too, and it's less than 1 watt per square foot today. And so if you're buying less of something, if you have to consume less of it, you are less exposed if the cost of that something, you know, starts getting volatile in the way that we talked about. A couple other trends. Households are getting smaller. The map or the chart on the top shows the results of one of the few questions that's been asked since 1790 in the U.S. Census, which is how many people live in your home? The answer was, the average answer in 1790 was 6. It's dropped every 10 years since that. We're down to 2.5 or 2.6, and it's still dropping. Some demographers predict that in a very short period of time, the modal new household will in fact be a single person. So households are getting smaller, homes are getting larger, lots are getting larger on average. It doesn't compute. People are also driving less. The red line shows the 9-year steady drop in passenger miles or vehicle miles. It works out the same per household per year. The blue line is the growth in the economy. So these have decoupled, if you will. Now passenger miles are dropping, but cargo miles are increasing. And that's a major reason why the state highways around here are crowded. And so if you try and just kick the cargo traffic out of town, well, try getting by without your daily deliveries. I mean, it doesn't work. So you really have to be sort of a strict integrationist when you talk about these issues if you're gonna come out ahead. The marketplace views Denver very well. It's ranked by PricewaterhouseCoopers and ULI as number 9 or 10 in the country as a desirable place to invest or to build. So the money's going to come in, but when you ask the developers and the investors what they're looking for when they shop nationally, what do they tell you? They're looking for opportunities for higher density, transit-oriented development, infill, preferably with a 24-hour character, if you can pull it off. But only, you know, in 10 years of saying that, they've only moved the needle from 3% of commercial equity to 5% going into there. And the reason is it's hard to do. So imagine this mountain of investment capital looking for the kind of stuff that's lined out in Boulder's sustainable communities vision and in your climate change and protection plan, in the transportation improvement plan, and what have you. And then you look at the reality of what it takes to actually do that development at scale, and it's a missed opportunity. Now, you might not want it, and I'm not saying that's not legitimate. I am saying these are the market forces that are out there. So then you get the point of view. I think this guy is really smart, and I'm sorry he had to resign the other day. This is John Kitzhaber, the governor of Oregon, and I was in a meeting with him where he said his governments were on the hook to maintain core legacy infrastructure, roads, water, bridges, sewers. And then there's the cool stuff that we're all turned on about, he said. Universal broadband, a clean energy economy, transit-oriented development, smart grid, green infrastructure. Really hard to think about. And these choices face us all over the place. Do we bottle rainstorms and treat them, or do we catch raindrops where they fall? Do we build streets to maximize traffic and speed, or do we build streets to connect people in what they do routinely? Do we expand the electric utility capacity, or do we run the utility for efficiency? And these are all issues that you're dealing with in real time right now, and they're connected. You have to see them as a set. Back 100 years ago, transportation planning and early city planning went hand in hand. Streets were being platted, but the high-capacity streets were judged to be worthy of needing the means to get from one end of the street to another and to connect between the streets. Governments then and now didn't have the capital that they needed to really build streets, so they granted franchise to street railway companies, which were often also the companies that operated electric railways. This is the map of the street railway network crisscrossing Ohio, 4,000 miles of service, kind of amazing. You had 270 miles in Colorado with a much smaller population. And it wasn't only the tramway in Denver. Boulder, Colorado Springs, Fort Collins, Grand Junction, Greeley, Littleton, Pueblo, Trinidad all have had street railways with this tight urban grid pattern that went together. On the interurban electric front, Boulder was connected to Denver and some of these other cities for a short while. Boulder only held on to its street railway for less than 2 decades. But it was long enough to set a pattern, the one that you can see as you go up and down Pearl Street today. And it was very much in the public mind. Now, the problem was that as growth happened, and cities made money off these franchises, this is how they paid for streets, they thought they could do it again by charging money for licenses for driving. There were rubber taxes on wheels, and they thought the more cars that were licensed, the better off that they'd be. So most places ended up choking on the traffic, abandoning their transit systems, and public policy favored a very different sort of vision. If you can't read those banners on the models there on the right, this is the opening of I-94 between Illinois and Wisconsin in the 1950s. The one on the left says Miss Concrete, and the one on the right says Miss Blacktop. And let me assure you, certain engineering societies still think that's funny. But so what if we redefined affordability to include the cost of transportation? And why might that be important? Conventional wisdom is that if you spend less than 30% of your income on housing, regardless of where it is, you're in a state of grace. It's called affordability. And the problem is that if you combine the cost of housing and transportation together, you find that on average in America, that more than half of income is going for these two costs. So there's a robust discussion about housing affordability and almost no public discussion about transportation affordability. And we went looking for the source of that 30% rule. I was sure there was a committee somewhere because that's how things are done in America. I didn't find a committee. What I found was an Old English poem that migrated over here that kids were taught, the last line of which was a week's wage for a month's rent. Think about it. That's where the rule of thumb of keeping your housing costs at 25% of income, and now you two know 100% of the hard science behind the affordability rule, mortgage underwriting. Oh man. All right, and so what this results in then is a problem called drive until you qualify. You get urged to find your dream house, which inevitably has sticker shock with it, at the core of a place. You get invited to go in a car and go drive out until you can find something that's affordable. And all of a sudden, the cost of housing drops precipitously. That's the red line. But the cost of transportation, the yellow line, keeps climbing. Statistically, it's possible to go from 1 to 1.1 cars per household, but in the real world, you go from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 and so forth. So the cost of living actually goes up in ways that isn't counting. And everywhere that you look, you find that for people earning less than median income, they're likely to be spending as much or more on transportation as they are on housing. So 76% of the communities in America look affordable using a housing-only index, but that drops to 28% using a housing plus transportation index. This is from Northeast Ohio, but the numbers are similar here. Housing costs grew faster than income, but transportation costs in the last decade grew faster than housing costs. And so the problem is if you don't take that into account, you got a problem. So let me summarize this, Angelique. If you change the index, which we did, we recommend that you adopt a new index, keep the sum of housing and transportation costs below 45% of your income. you could map this and see where it's working and it's not working. And we take into account urban form and transportation choice, holding income and household size constant, and we're able to verify these costs. Now, real quickly, these are maps of Boulder. The map on the left shows density, and the darker it is, the denser it is. If you look closely, you can see the street networks. The darker it is, the more associated it is with small blocks and walkable areas, too. The map on the right shows vehicle miles traveled per household per year, and these two are mirror images of each other, where one's high, the other is low. If you, same thing on net density in automobiles per household. This one shows transit accessibility within the region here, taking frequency into account. If you build it, run it frequently, and connect it regionally, people will ride it, and that doesn't happen in enough of this area here. You've got an admirable profile, as we found in the relatively new 2013 data from the census. Only 50% of workers in Boulder drove alone to work. That's one of the best profiles in the whole country. So pat yourselves on the back for that one. The problem is that, and you know why, because it's all the stuff you've been pushing. Everything from carpooling to car sharing to bike sharing to better transit connectivity, walkability. It's great stuff, what have you. The problem is that only 1 trip out of 5 is for the journey to work. So what else do people do? They eat. They go for medical care. You know, they shop. They visit people. And you really, you know, real people have to pay all of those other costs too. And you don't have indicators on that in your transportation management plan for your long-range indicators. And you don't have indicators on affordability. I'm not going to make it to the end of the presentation, so let me make this observation right here. If the intent of that plan is to set goals by which you set priorities and actually allocate resources and choose to spend more on some stuff and less on others, if you don't take the community benefits imperative that Karen was talking about into account, you'll meet your goal. You won't add community benefits expectations in from your transportation spending. Now, to make better transportation in the core corridor work, you're going to need more riders, you're going to need more demand, you're going to need more leverage on small business creation. It can't just be national, it's got to be locally owned. And so when Google comes in, you have to think about it in this context. It's net plus on the face of it, no question, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be better over time. I'll leave the how to the question and answer. If this was the map, it should be for transportation choice. Wherever it's red is where you have the most frequent choices in Boulder. Most of the map would be red. The problem is it's only red in the core communities surrounding downtown and surrounding Pearl Street. When you get out to 30th and Pearl, where the transit village is supposed to be, I mean, when I looked at it from afar, and I've toured it twice in the last 2 days, my conclusion, after hearing some people say there really isn't room to do that much infill there, was that you can't put more than 2 downtown Chicagos between 30th and Pearl and the expressway. So when you talk about doing a pilot for the next generation of transportation or for adding form-based coding, which you just had a solicitation for consultants on, those things are only pilots if you intend to take things to the next level on a continuous improvement loop and actually make more of that map the kind of accessible that's going to result in community benefits. And I'm sorry, I have a whole sequence here we could spend a week on, and obviously I can't do that. But I would say that you should do it because it's not only the wealthy who live in Boulder. You've been committed forever to an inclusive, progressive culture here. You can't do that if you're pricing people out the back door by not being upfront on what the cost of transportation is. You have, and the other side of it is it's eminently solvable here. You've got the organizations that are committed to the sort of resilience that I talked about, and you're actually aware of how to get things done. What you're missing is the demand for which you don't know you could capture. The effective demand for something that you don't know you could have is 0. So I suggest strongly that coming out of this process and this set of meetings and in the discussion we're about to have, we talk about how do we actually capture community benefits. Karen talked about one version, value capture off of the real estate surplus. I'm arguing there's another set that accrues directly to individuals because they'll have less exposure with cash out of pocket when things get rough and you're buying an insurance policy, so that you can keep Boulder strong, keep Boulder weird in a good way, and succeed. So thank you.
Thank you, Scott.